kote nami sani darbate aga kote nami sani darbate kafe mbulu nami ma abdate aga malanjira chachap senanya teja Chuturi dal galoto galam finfinne se dal galoto silaka jalala dal galoto walin ram faganu dal galoto jalan fage dal galoto bunnalen kantu fa dal galoto garam chuturi dal galoto galam finfinne se dal galoto silaka jalala dal galoto walin ram faganu dal galoto jalan fagese digani garasana garati kamu mande no basan adampane no adambo soreti ada sore erbani rabu sakabai sekani sekani kan gargar no bata jarai farda sida katani sida dabale suri okalaletia irkanu dangesani barri turebu okalaletia wadesi jiragube ambora tanaki okalaletia narafa gatte de siadun kiyayo mafi mada nafe nafe aga dani mada nafe chachap senya delave alinjiru aga alinjiru kokute nya dedi tuwa jetti ronal kani aga tuwa jetti ronal kani namagaran ane mamunar kani aga malanjira chachap senya dedi malanjira malanjira yaga malanjira chachap senya dedi alinjiru alinjiru yaga alinjiru kokute nya dedi kote nami sani darbate aga kote nami sani darbate kafe mbulu nami ma abdate aga malanjira
Bonjour à tous. Bonjour Marame.
Bonjour Coumba.
Hello. Welcome everyone. Welcome Dr. Marame and welcome Gideon to this Friday conversation that we are having on Africans Rising platform. Thank you, Maurice, for helping us put this together. First of all, thank you to all of the people who have joined us, who are already with us on the Zoom, but also people who are following us on Facebook Live, as this conversation is transmitted live on Africans Rising Facebook. So thank you for joining us again. It's been since the break out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Africans Rising have started this series of conversation that replace some of the meetings, the gathering that we used to do, conversation that we used to have, that we know we cannot do really physically, but we knew that we needed to keep in touch with our membership, but also our friends and supporters. So first of all, for those who are new to the conversation, who are new to Africans Rising, just to know that this is a movement of people. Now we are counting about 400 institutions that are members of Africans Rising. mainly organizations, associations, movement, local group, but also large networks of organizations, people, whether they're workers' union or religious groups or youth movement or women's group. That comes together since about almost 3 years now around the Kilimanjaro Declaration. You can go on africansrising.org to see it. The principles that we put together there. And fundamentally, the idea is that there is unfinished business on African liberation, even though most of the countries on the continent are considered independent politically. There have been struggles in the 60s. We still think that most people on the African continent are not really living in the dignity that they should be, but also Africans Rising, because it's a movement of Africans, not only on the continent, but also Africans in the diaspora. We also consider that Africans in the diaspora, whether they're migrants or they're a descendant of people who have been taken there through the Atlantic slave trade, are still not living also in the dignity that they need. So there is an unfinished business, and movements have come together to really work on that with a simple principle of solidarity, meaning that when some Africans are coming together somewhere to fight for justice, for peace, that other Africans, wherever they are in the world, be in solidarity with them. So this is really the reason of being for Africans Rising. So you might imagine that we find ourselves at a very special then moment of what is going on right now. We first have to recognize and take the fact that first of all, living under this pandemic is stressful for a lot of people, especially on the continent, on the African continent. The economic stress is very, very heavy on most people, and we have to acknowledge that before anything, the context that we are in. We also have to acknowledge and recognize that the violence that we are talking about on Africans and African bodies are happening everywhere in the world. And the murder or the execution of George Floyd being captured on video and pushing this outcry just found already so much that was already going on, not only on the continent and outside of the continent, where we all knew that it's not acceptable, it's not what it should be. But then there is a moment where it really gets crystallized, and we are in that moment. And we have to say that from that moment and the outcry and the movements that followed and that are still continuing today, we are landing on many other places that are, I want to say, not totally unexpected, because these are work that people have been working, pushing for a long time, but it gives it much more strength, much more visibility. When we speak about names of roads being changed in France, we've landed much further than where we started with the murder of George Floyd. When we talk about regrets, I guess that's what we can call it, because it's not really an apology, regrets being expressed about the role of Belgium in the Congo happening. We have to recognize that this movement is really taking a different form at different places. This is why we brought this conversation together. It might, for some people, when we talk about it, it didn't even make sense. Like, what are you talking about? People are talking about racism and how it manifests with police brutality in the US. And here you are talking about African liberation and so on. But we go from the understanding that racism take different forms in different places at different times, and that we need to get to the roots of it to really, change the relationship among people around the world. And to have this conversation today, we have two wonderful people that I will first of all ask them to introduce themselves. Gideon is in Nigeria, and he's part of the coordinating collective of Africans Rising. So this is our elected board. And Dr. Marame Gay is in the US, and also she's a teacher and work in many different fields, including the topic that we are talking about right now, but really intersectionality of different issues, whether it's race, migration, gender, and all that. So both of them are here to really, this is a conversation. You can put your questions in, your thoughts, what you think. We will ask people who are also on the live. The first thing that I would ask you also who are following us on the Zoom or in live is to introduce yourself, because that's what we start with. Again, my name is Coumba. I am a coordinator of Africans Rising for Peace, Justice, and Dignity. And I'm really, your host into this conversation. So, and I'm based in Senegal. So you can type in the chat who you are, where you're joining us from, while we hear Gideon and Dr. Marame introducing themselves to us. Gideon, you can go first.
Okay, my name is Gideon. I'm joining from Nigeria. Like Coumba, I'm also interested in seeing a truly prosperous and peaceful African continent, and to see that all of the peoples of Africa, wherever they may be across the globe, live in dignity. And so for that reason, I volunteer with Africans Rising as a Pan-African movement of peoples and organizations. And that's it. Thank you for having me.
So much. Thank you, Gideon, for joining us from Nigeria. You will have to tell us, I'll come back to you about Nigeria. How is all this view there? What's going on around this whole issues? You have to, we've heard few things coming out of Nigeria, including some of the people organizing, protests and so on, and supporting, the movements for Black Lives, and also, people talking about changes there. Around colonial issues, but we'll come back to that. Dr. Marame, please tell us a little more about you.
Well, my name is Marame Gay, and I'm originally from Senegal and have been living in the US for 22 years now, where I am an associate professor of African Studies, Gender. My degree is in comparative literature with feminist theory and translation. And my work is mostly on African women's verbal art, migration, gender, and sexuality. So for me, what it means for Africans Rising is when it's good that you talked about dignity, but for me, what dignity means is Africans who are proud of who they are and know where they are coming from, and know about the value of African civilizations prior to the arrival of Europeans and the Arabs, because I think it's very important also to point that part of the Arabs and racism from that perspective too. And sometimes when we talk about racism in Africa, people kind of scratch their heads because we view racism as a black and white, especially when it comes to Africa, what comes to mind is only South Africa. But I think even in African continents where we are all Black, there is racism. I'm not talking about ethnic, ethnicity. I'm talking about the fact that white privilege actually is present everywhere in Africa, even in countries that are ruled by Africans. You see white privilege, that Africans themselves have internalized their so-called inferiority to the point that we ourselves reinforce that white privilege. So to me, what I am interested in talking about the disparities in terms of what is allowed some people and what is not allowed some other people, and how African nations themselves get caught in this narrative where we always look to the West for solutions to our own problems, and do not really look to develop our own contextualized solutions. So that's also, and we have seen that in the pandemic, where Africans started really well when it comes to dealing with it. And now it seems like there's chaos in many countries because we kind of tend to follow what other people are doing.
Thank you so much, Madam. We'll come back to that that issue. Yes, racism based on especially white privilege is prevalent everywhere, including on the continent and in places. And we're not talking only about South Africa and apartheid that everybody knows about, but even in countries where we come from, whether it's Senegal, Ghana, Nigeria. We know it, we see it in the different form, and we will name them. So Gideon, I'll start with you and ask.
Let me briefly interject. Some people are asking for translations in French. Are we allowed to speak French at times, or?
Yes, I think we are because we wanted this code to be in always translated. We just have not been able to manage technically and getting people in line regularly, because with this conversation that we're having right now, we had the same conversation last week in French.
Okay.
You know?
Okay.
But
sounds good.
With different people, but the same conversation. But I think because it's different people, then new perspectives always come and people want to hear. I think it will have to be just something that we will have to do all the time, which is to translate not only in French, but in Portuguese and in Swahili. It takes a lot, but it will take that for Africans Rising to make sure that we break also the barriers of colonial languages, and that people from Nigeria and people from Senegal can really talk to each other and to talk to people from Tunisia and Mozambique. So I will present all my apologies to people who do not speak English. We can share the same conversation that happened in French in the last Friday, and we can work also on translation of the specific pieces that comes out of here. And Maram, because you speak French, maybe there's
My French is so rusty now.
we could interject a few things in French. So Gideon, I like to hear more from you. I know that you've been organizing on campus, organizing young people, mainly students, and you've been a Pan-Africanist, and your dream has been really about, yes, this Pan-African dream of bringing African people together, but also really achieving African really your thing, your work. Tell us on about what is happening right now in the moment. How are you, what's going on for you there in Nigeria? How are the young people reacting to all this? Where do you think we are? Where we want to go?
Thank you so much. Like you said, I speak in Pan-Africanism to one time ago.
We have a hard time hearing you. There is some static on the mic. I'm not sure where it comes from, but I'll mute, and Dr. Mara, maybe you can mute and we can see, but I think it's from Gideon.
Can you hear me now?
Can you remove your earphone, please, and then test?
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you. This is better.
Okay. I said, like you mentioned, I picked interest in Pan-Africanism a very long time ago, and about when Africans Rising was to be launched, I decided to mobilize support for the Kilimanjaro Declaration, and of course, quite a number of our friends, our sisters and brothers, then showed support, joined us in mobilizing, and we did it together. But of course, there were those who I would say are still held down by these psychological shackles of division, who will say, rather than saying Africans rising, why don't we start with Nigerians rising? And then you have to remind them that the liberation struggles of the African people must be fought in solidarity. While we talk about the issues in Nigeria, of course, we have to recognize that the liberation that we are seeking will not come if we cannot work beyond, if we cannot work in solidarity beyond those arbitrary partitions that were left by the colonialists. And though it took a lot of preaching and all, but quite a number of folks were able to relate and they came along. And so since then, I've been preaching the Pan-African message, the message contained in the Kilimanjaro Declaration, the message being propagated by the Africans Rising movement, and we're still doing that. Presently, with the recent protests in the United States, I was really energized when I saw groups that I am not directly connected to also mobilizing, organizing protests to show solidarity in support of what is happening in the United States and other parts of the globe. And quite a number of people are coming to realize by the day that we need to show solidarity whenever African peoples anywhere in the world are being oppressed, whenever the rights of our sisters and brothers in any part of the globe is being suppressed, that we have to stand up and show solidarity. And that's happening, and that's really, really encouraging for the work that we are doing. Concerning the COVID-19, it's not been very easy, like you noted. Lots of psychological stress, having to stay indoors, not going out, and then again dealing with the atmosphere here. It's when you're seeing the figures on the one hand, and then you're seeing the reaction from the people on the other hand. The people have not been very, very trustful of the government, because let me be sincere with you too, the government have not been totally sincere with the people in fighting the virus. And so you see some skepticism in some quarters, and you're just scared seeing the numbers too, the deaths, the number of deaths is rising. And then you see the people too still expressing, quite a number of people, but of course, quite a number of citizens organizations too have responded very well in the form of charity, trying to help the poor. And that's where I find inspiration. I'm really, really impressed by the responses from a lot of citizens organizations, labor unions, association, community associations responding to feed the poor and the needy. For me, I've been saying that the palliatives from the government have been in the form of palliatives that don't really palliate. That's my observation here in Nigeria. But I'm really, really impressed with what's happening from some of the ordinary people, what they have been doing. But also there is skepticism on another side. When you look at some side, the poor people on the streets, they just feel that rather than die at home, I'd rather go die on the street. That's also happening, and it's taking a lot of work to get them convinced that we really cannot be too careful with this thing. We have to do our own part to save ourselves and to save humanity from this virus. So that's that about the coronavirus.
Thank you so much. Of course, on this conversation, we always want to see the context that we are working on. Organizing during this time is not easy. And the last train
Is she frozen?
Yeah,
Or is it just me?
she's
Well,
frozen.
I'm just gonna keep on so that until she comes back. Uh, I think when we're talking about racism, especially at the systematic level, we should, in the beginning, when George Floyd was killed, the reaction from Africa was slow. And that was something that actually surprised me, that Africans were not the first to rise up and denounce the violence and then support the African American communities in the US. And many people on social media were comparing that to when Charlie Hebdo happened in France, where African presidents were the first to come and condemn that, the killing of those people. But now when it came to the killing of Black people in America, the Africans themselves were very slow to react. And that was something that was surprising. And I was happy to see that later people came around and started protesting locally in Nigeria, in Dakar, and in other places. But I think that the conversation needs to go around why the solidarity that you talk about is very important. Because I think that at this point, many Africans are removed from how systematic racism affect Africans even on the continent. For example, we should not think about racism as something that is just happening in America or in France. And all of those systems are connected to why, for example, young Africans cannot find jobs on the continent and they have to leave, for example, to go to Europe and serve as laborers there. And what is that doing to our economies? And what does it mean that it's always our bodies, the Black bodies, for example, that are transported toward the West to work? We can connect that to slavery, and everybody knows that immigration is now the new slavery. So what does it mean that Africans don't feel like they have a favorable home at home in Africa, and then have to recognize that this is connected to globalization, to systematic racism, and how, for example, the new Africans, for example, who leave the continent through immigration, myself included, find themselves in the middle of America, for example, and how our identity shift. I'm not saying that in Africa, when we were growing up there, we did not know about racism, we did not know about being Black, but I think this is the first time that, for example, migrants or immigrants like myself, who are from Africa, find themselves in a systematic racist system where they became Black people, for example. For example, these days in America, the protests are so much that it is sometimes unsettling as a Black person to even walk outside, because the same way that people are protesting, the same way white supremacists are also organizing to counter those protests. So we see people sitting at the light, for example, and 4 white male coming and throwing a flammable liquid on her face and then throwing a match, literally trying to burn her to death. We know that there have been some lynching that right now we're really not clear what happened, if these were suicides or they were actually murders. And as a Black person living in America and also having ties in Africa, now I have to figure out how I am going to navigate in this system myself. Do I go outside? Am I safe? Are my children safe? And all of that. And in my close circles, there are many talks about going back home to Africa. But that itself itself also comes with its own, really convoluted mode, so to say, that you have to figure out, okay, when I go home, will I be able to make a home in West Africa? And that is connected to the racism, globalization, white privilege, and how African countries are not still, they're struggling to be favorable homes for their people. So the connections are really tight, and we need to really be able to see that and see why it is important that Black people and Africans come in solidarity with everybody in the diaspora in order to fight racism, to fight white privilege, so that our homes also can be favorable for us to stay there.
I agree very much with you, Marine. Hope I got the pronunciation right. Marine, right?
Marame.
Marame, okay. I agree very much with you. And then on the point that you made earlier about your disappointment with the speed with which many Africans step forward to show solidarity with our sisters and brothers in the United States, I think that it could also be related to the fact that too many of our people on the continent are so absorbed by many of the local problems that they face. We still have very critical issues, very critical problems. Of course, racism is quite important, and our people must respond. I agree with that. I am preaching that, but many of our people are still so absorbed with issues like poverty, with even the undemocratic systems that we have that are also bad, an economic system that puts the larger bulk of our people below poverty. You're aware that Nigeria is now the headquarters of poverty in the world, according to World Poverty Clock. We now have about 87 million Nigerians living in poverty. And so you can understand that when people are made to live in these very dejecting, frustrating conditions, I think it sometimes happens, though not justifiable, that they tend to be concerned about certain local issues, and they tend not to be able to see the connection between their own challenges and those of those who are connected to them. I think that's the way that I've been trying to explain it to myself, because I've asked myself to why the very late response. But I think that is it. But of course, too, there are quite a number of people on the continent who are very conscious, who are organized, and who understand the intersection.
Yeah. I think it's important for Africans to understand that yes, we are now independent, so to say, but there is a lot that we need to free ourselves from. And when it comes to the African Americans and the diaspora, many of them actually fought for the liberation of African countries. So we need to also remember that. And I think that has a lot to do with education and what we are taught people at school, because we don't teach them those contributions of Black people in history and in also the liberation of African countries, for example. The same way that everybody rallied about South Africa during apartheid, many African Americans actually play a big role in the independence of African countries. The other thing is that we need to also make sure that people understand that the poverty in a small village in Nigeria is very much connected to what is happening all over the world too. So it's not a chance encounter that Africa has all the resources that it has, but still it's not able to feed its people, to give them jobs, to maintain them, or keep them at home. So those connections need to be made so people can see that the struggles of Black people in the diaspora are very much connected to the struggles of Black people on the continent. If we look at, for example, many of our failed states and our failed governments, many of them actually are serving the interests of Europe, so to say. So how is that connected to what is happening to Europe? So Africa continues to be the place where everybody comes to take away from, and nothing is brought back to back to the continent. And we are ourselves participating in that. And there is racism even on the continent, something that actually parallels what is happening everywhere else in the world where Black people are oppressed and subjugated. So people need to make those connections in order to feel concerned about what is happening everywhere.
Let me quickly note that some times ago, history was taken away from the curriculum in Nigeria, and it became a big issue. And I'm telling you that, I'm saying rather that the political leaders do not understand what you are saying. They do not understand the need to educate our people to see the connection between the issues that we confront here and that our other sisters and brothers across the continent or even globally that they face. And that's where the issue also, that's also a major point that we really need to address. And then again, you know, even the level of education, the level of literacy, let's even say literacy, it's very low in many African countries. And then back to the point that I was raising earlier, that even among those who have the college degrees, the quality of what they get is still very, very questionable, because it does not really teach them to understand what it means to be African. It does not really teach them to advance the liberation struggle and all that. The kind of education that we have is still very close to what the colonialists left, which was just to give certain skills, which was just to teach them the history of the Europeans. And that's also a major problem. And I think that
is
might
true. That is true. There needs to be a big reform of our educational system that are contextualized to African values and African cultural practices. We cannot be using, especially when it comes to languages, for example, we leave our local languages to on the back burner and then use European languages. We think in European languages, we communicate in European languages, we teach our children in European languages and leave our own local languages. And this educational system that we've had, like you said, have been there for like 40 years, 50 years since the colonial powers were there, and nothing has been changed literally. And we still continue to have very low levels of literacy. We have not examined why those low levels of literacy, and we don't teach children our history. Many of us think that our history started in the 11th century when the Arabs came, or in whatever century when the Europeans came. So many Africans actually, we are ashamed of what had happened in our country, in our communities prior to the arrival of the Arabs or the Europeans. We've been brainwashed to think that our African cultural practices are very barbaric, to the point that we don't even want to teach it to our children. We don't want to know what it is. If you look at it, for example, yourself, myself, we have Arab names, we have European names, whether we're Christian or Muslim. And when it comes to the Muslims, for example, they call that Muslim names, but those are not Muslim names, they're Arab names, because they're names that were there before Islam. And when it comes to the Christian, they also have the names of the Romans too. So as a matter of, so literally in a nutshell, we have completely stripped ourselves and taken what is somebody else's, and we don't know exactly who we are. So we're kind of like fumbling around, trying to figure out what to do. But many of those practices that we have adopted from others do not work for us, and we stubbornly try to make them work. We stubbornly try to make them work, and that is not, that is what is actually keeping us behind.
Yes. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry I had some internet connection issues. The conversation, I'm so glad is going so well. I just want us also to continue push a little further. I know one of the questions that keeps on coming for a lot of people on the continent, since we've been in solidarity with, our people in the US for the movements for Black Lives and so on, was always like, don't you see everything that is happening on this continent? What that got to do? And of course, yes, we are making the connection here. And what about, people are talking, what about our corrupt presidents? What about this? What about that? Where is it that the connection comes? And this is really where we want this conversation to go. If we consider that the racism is the ideology really that on which, of course, the slavery was built, colonialism was built, we also have to recognize that it's still the ideology that managed the relationships of between countries, even now. Who decide and who has power over what, and the continuation of the exploitation of the continent. Yes, it doesn't happen the same way that it happened under colonization or under slavery, but today we are still facing all of this bleeding of the continent through the illicit financial flow. There is an extraction that is still going on, and yes, we do have people on the continent, like we had all the time, who are facilitating those things. So really, we want to talk about what do we do now? What do we do at this particular moment where everybody has to face and recognize the fact that racism cannot stand and be accepted the way it was. I think also the context of COVID-19 has also showed a certain, I want to know, I don't want to say fragility, but connectivity of human beings that also has been shaking everyone. And to know that, okay, you cannot keep a group of people on the margin and expect that it's going to be okay, because when COVID-19 will be done and finished, there will be other things that will be coming, and we will have to face those things as a whole group and as human. So someone is putting questions there and saying, yes, what do we do? We are here talking about racism. What about what's going on here? And my really invitation is to explain for you to explain to us how are these whole things connected. And I know you already started addressing them, but even more precisely, but also in terms of action, where do we go from here? Gideon, what do you think? How do young people see things moving in Nigeria also? Thank you.
I think that we should begin with education. We should begin with restating it to our people that the decolonization project is not over. I have had some of my friends say to me, stop talking about colonialism, stop talking about slavery, and they want us to assume, or they want us to agree that all of our problems stems from the internal inadequacies or the irresponsibility of a few folks who we have entrusted power in their hands. And I think that we really need to begin that conscientization process to tell them that from slavery to colonialism to where we are now, we are still dominated economically, and even the political independence that we claim to have is not totally full. Because I look at it in Nigeria, for instance, when the colonialists were living, they ensured that they left power in the hands of those who would serve as their puppets. We had some brilliant, conscious guys. They ensured that they did not hand over power to them. And you will realize that till today, we are still being led by the least qualified among our people. I call it a aristocratic system. It's aristocracy. So you will see that the legacy of colonialism still lingers on. And I think we just have to make our people realize that. Many people don't. They don't know that these things are still affecting us. They do not know that we are still affected even by racism. Our people see it in the foreign football that they watch, and they think that it just happens once in a while. And when you tell them that it's a big issue that we have to begin to pay attention to, some tend to feel that you are just being over agitated or over concerned. And I think we have to begin with that, but much more, we have to begin to look at how to organize our people to take actions to break the issues down. The decolonization project must be broken down. You know, the democratization effort must be emphasized, and what we need to do to ensure that our countries become truly democratic. Because when we talk about African liberation, it's about ensuring that, for me, it's about ensuring that our people can really take full control of their own lives. As of today, I must tell you that those who win elections in maybe my country, for instance, maybe just Nigeria, but I guess it's also the same in many other parts of Africa, are those who are being supported by some foreign agencies. You see them come with money, they buy votes during elections, they use the instruments of the military to scare people from genuinely expressing their genuine choices at the polls. And these are issues that we have to break the struggle down to, and now guide people in how we can resolve or take on these issues one at a time. Let us say, I've heard Kumi, for instance, talk about 2 times is enough. You get, and I've been talking about the need to help our people so that they can be capable of a critical assessment of their political choices. That's just like breaking it down. I think we just have to break the issues down and organize our people to take on these issues, maybe prioritizing one per time and going forward in that order.
Thank
but
you.
also ensuring that we can share experience across the partitions, across the colonial partitions. And I also believe that some of the situations in our countries are almost similar, and we should be able to take experience from one part of the continent to the other, and even from our sisters and brothers in the diaspora in America, take inspiration from some of their actions. As they, I've been really inspired by some of the images emanating from the United States, young people standing before the National Guards and the police and convincing them to take knee with them, some of the very brilliant speeches. I think we have to begin to ensure that our young people can also take inspiration from there, and also take actions, critical actions, meaningful actions on the ground here in Africa. I think we can.
Gideon. Thank you so much. I want to come back to Maram and maybe where Gideon left about inspiration and solidarity. Someone talks about it. What are the actions? And historically, we've seen solidarity from different parts of the world. It always happened. I know that when it was a struggle against apartheid, during the struggles of independence, there was always solidarity from the diaspora. For people here. And this time also, there have been many action statements, people protesting. We have people right now who have been arrested and are in jail because they protested and were in solidarity with people in the US. So it goes both ways, the inspiration and the solidarity. But moving forward, all of these things that now are coming out, and people who are ready, mainly I want to say a lot of young people in places that we couldn't even imagine. I mean, there's a lot of things that people were fighting for. I mean, simple things. A change, this just happened here in Senegal, the change of a name of a place called Place de l'Europe. When Ulo Biaber and them started doing the first press conference and talked about it, people were laughing at them. And today, all of a sudden, the mayor of Gorée Island is signing this paper. It's not a new fight that is coming. People are there who are doing this work. But it's just a very special moment where things seems to be shifting quicker and people seem to be responding quicker. So what should we do? What should we ask for? How should we organize? How do we be in solidarity? And what are the actions that needs to be taken concretely? Of course, including in the change that you're talking about. Yes, you said that education needs to change, but for it to change, somebody needs to organize for it and ask for it and say, from now on, parents here are the parents who are saying that our children must also learn our language, our children must also learn our history. Where are the movements of the teachers and the professors who are saying from now on, we're not going to teach only this way, we're going to teach this also. So that is really my question. Everything that needs to happen and happen now, who can we count on to make it happen and to push further, these changes and make this shift?
Yeah. I think you said something that's very important in terms of what do we do now that it seems like something that is very big happened and everybody seems to be paying attention and ready to move. What do we do? And especially when it comes to young people who have been organizing rallies, doing protests. I don't know if some of you have seen what happened in France last Friday when some protesters walked into a museum and grabbed some African artifacts and said that this was stolen from Africa and that they wanted to take it. So people actually are now galvanized, especially when it comes to what happened to George Floyd. So this is a moment that we need to seize and really make great impact. And I'm glad that you talked about the role of the civil society in making change, because usually in Africa, from my experience, what people do is wait for the government. The government needs to do this, the government needs to do that. But then in our local communities, we need to be the ones that are organizing to create change. The same way that, for example, Yana Mar organized in 2012 to help people go out to vote. We need to understand that people are powerful. And when they come together, they create change. There is no going around that. When people come together with one purpose, they create change. Whether the government wants it or not, it's going to happen. So when it comes to this educational system, yes, the educational system is not working, but parents themselves should not leave it to the teachers to make that change. If I want my children to learn about African history, I'm going to go and look at like-minded parents so that we can organize and come together and ask that our children be taught African history. We're not just going to leave it to the educational system to decide what our children are going to learn. So we need to be much more involved in that. When it comes to how we want our communities to be, we should be able to do that too. So I think that all these pockets of organizing have to happen depending on what people are interested in, and not let the government. We can always say that our government doesn't do what we want it to do, but we also have a duty ourselves to make that government work. So we have to ask for what we need and what we want to see happen in our communities. We cannot just let the government decide on that. And that's where voting is important. People need to come out and vote. People need to go and rally people and organize and educate and push for change. Push for change. How many of our children don't know anything about their histories? Well, parents, if they want that to happen, they need to go also to the school and demand for that to happen. So when it comes to solidarity, I think that we can each do our part. And then when we see others doing the same thing that interests us, we can come together and work together. And that's the only way that we can make change, by working together, by making things move and not waiting for others to do it for us. We cannot make others do it for us.
Thank you, Maram. Just to know that there are connections. People are connecting and working together. Maybe it's not always as visible. Different movements on the continent and outside of the continent are really supporting, learning from each other. Whether when it was working on Sudan, we had the support of people in the diaspora, and on this particular issue on the murdering of George Floyd, yes, there was not as visible in terms of the people on the continent moving, but there were people who did this, not only organized protests with statement, and at a different level. I'm not only talking about civil society, but academics, all kind of group really putting their voice behind it. So that is already happening. And we need more of those. And now, how do we connect even better?
Now that let me just say this.
Yes.
Let me just say this. I mean, the murder of George Floyd was horrible, it was terrible and everything. But let's also bear in mind that there are murders happening on the continent every day that are so unjust, based on racism and colorism. For example, in Mauritania, darker skinned people are being killed and enslaved. And that is something that we needed to be outraged about prior even to George Floyd being killed. So there are so many people that actually are killed, imprisoned wrongfully based on the color of their skin or their class or some kind of difference. So those are the things that actually are very pertinent and relevant to the continent itself. Let's not even talk about the diaspora. What is happening in Mauritania next door to Senegal is horrible, but we haven't seen anybody rise up and talk about it or do something about it. So yes, the killing of George Floyd is a catalyst to many of these things that we're seeing now. And some of it actually might be emotional reactions to that, but there are so many injustices happening on the continent that are related to this systematic racism that you're talking about, that we need to fight about.
Madam, what I want to say is that people are fighting about those things. And, you know, again, I'm talking about the issue of visibility. Like, for example, last year, 25th of May, Africa Liberation Day was specifically at Africans Rising Dawn on slavery and what you're talking about in Mauritania. But what we are saying today is that it seems to be a special moment with the killing on video and the execution on video of George Floyd that now brings everything out and make people extremely sensitive to all of these things. So yes, there is so much to do, and there are people who have been doing it for a long time. Now is the time to bring now everyone else who was not looking at that or who did not consider all of these things, to bring them to be even more powerful and to move forward. And the question is really, how do we do this? How do we move forward? What are the keys to make it happen? Because for us, these conversations are really a way to connect also people and to bring those who are already doing action to even know each other and then get support from new ones.
Gideon, do you mind if I respond to one of the panelists who was asking me a question directly? This person is Dovi Abbey. They said, Maram, please gather a few of your colleagues and let's resolve to organize summer classes in Africa and add projects that will pertain to African issues, right, about Mauritania. And I have been doing this. Yes. I have been doing this. It's been like, I think now this is 7 years since I went on the ground at the University of Dakar and brought together all the students that were doing a master's or PhD and said that since the professors are overwhelmed, let us help, so that somebody like me and my other colleagues who are situated in the US can help out by reading theses, reading dissertations, so that the student can have a leg up before, because I know that the professors are overwhelmed, so that they can get some relief, and then we read and then give advice and all of that. And it has been so hard to organize that. I am telling you that it's really difficult to collaborate in a way that we could be useful. So one has to be bold and do it. And on my part, right now, for the past 3 years, I've been leading a group of 3,080 women, all from Senegal, living in the US, trying to connect my scholarship as it pertains to female empowerment and gender and activism on the ground. We do a lot of things together. We fundraise, we help hospitals, we get women out of domestic violence cases. So we do a lot of stuff. But again, these efforts are always isolated because each one of us is doing something on their own. It would be really great to come together. And I'm a member of the collective Dafodoy that's working against violence against women in Senegal, that actually regroups so many organizations. But I would want to see so many collectives on poverty, collective on incarceration and social justice and the law and all of this. So that all the efforts that are actually scattered everywhere could be coming together under one umbrella. So that's what I would like to see. I'm sorry I interrupted there.
Thank you, Maram. And again, congratulations and everything you're doing. One of the reasons why we wanted to hear you here is that it's not just what you're doing in the school, but what you're doing every day in terms of organizing. And what we know is that it is organizing that will really push us forward in this moment. What we are trying to say is that yes, we've been organizing for a long time on all of these issues. Everything that you take on, there's somebody somewhere has been resisting, have been organizing. Africans, whether they're on the continent or in the diaspora, have never been just standing there and letting things happen to them. People are always organizing. But what we are saying is this moment is very special. What makes it special? There are several things, of course, but the level of awareness, consciousness, but also how people are ready to take things down is a moment to push things further. And we've been talking about African liberation, and so many people always saying, we are not so free, we're not so free, we need more independence. But this is a moment, again, where we can go further than where we are. Gideon?
Okay, I think we should do what we have been doing. I've seen that happening, show solidarity with our sisters and brothers in the United States, but also use the opportunity to intensify conversation like we are doing now, but do more of it around how the legacies of colonialism, slavery lingers till today. And then moving forward, I think we need to break the issues down, like I said, have an agenda that we now break down into specific teams, and then ensure that our people can organize even within those colonial borders to resolve some of these issues so that someday we can achieve the unity that we want. But of course, the actions being taken within these borders should be connected, like Maram said. We should ensure that there is a connection between people taking actions in Nigeria, people trying to advance the democratization process in Senegal or in Guinea or in any other part. So let us just ensure that we intensify the conversation. Let us continue to show solidarity to our sisters and brothers in the United States, intensify conversation about how we are not still free from domination of colonialist and imperialist forces, and then begin to organize specific campaigns on issues that reflect the aspirations of our people. I've been saying to my folks that if we go on the street and ask our sisters and brothers, what do we organize around now? We can get a sense of what you see them talking about, how what they have is not totally close to democracy. We see them, and I think that the more we take on these issues as they have prioritized it within themselves, the more we'll be able to mobilize them to also take on the the other issues that they might not even be able to connect to their aspirations right now. So,
Last Friday we had the same conversation, and we had it in French. And one of the takeaway really was about, of course, breaking those borders. And people are saying, listen, we have to organize and force our government to go towards, political unity. We know that the way we are weak and as in this small type of state is not working. And we know that it won't happen also by itself. So it means also people working and putting pressure to say that we want different, a different way of our countries being organized. So that has been one of the takeaway of last week. And the Pan-African Federalists, for example, are really saying, let's go even push for referendums in different countries and ask people to make a choice about coming together and having countries coming together. Uh, I also want to push a little, yes, go ahead. I want to push you a little further around the fight for against colonialism and independence and African liberation. really. Because, Maram has says it, racism, we live through it. We live in countries where you are taught since small that, the best thing you got to do is to do everything to be closer to white, whether it's language, clothes, culture, anything you do to make sure that you're closer to what is white is how you get ahead of everybody else, basically. And also, in the global framework, countries that are held up there, that used at least to be held up there, were countries, under really, whoever you consider white and white privilege. But the COVID-19 has done something. Really, it showed that, everybody was kind of looking and figuring out their ways, that what was shown to us and what was happening was not the reality. So something is broken in the way we were mesmerized by the Occidental countries. And today, I think young people are ready for something different, and they don't think that all of the solution will be coming from outside. What do you think?
I think, and I think I said it earlier, that at the beginning of the pandemic, it was a moment for Africa to change the narrative about Africa. Because when other countries like the US were counting 20,000 new cases a day and so many deaths and what have you, many African countries had maybe one case, two cases, and they were actually curing people, doing it their own ways. And that was a moment for African youth and everybody to see that we actually can solve our own problems. We don't have to look to the West to create change in our countries and take things in our hands. Right now, I don't know if that is the case anymore, because what I see is many Africans listening to what is happening in the West and now reversing course and doing it the way the West has been doing it. I think that now is the time for us to know that we can do things on our own. And that is very tied to white supremacy and the fact that Africans themselves sometimes believe that whatever is white or Western is whatever is better. We always look to the West first. Before even having a reaction, we wait to see how the West reacts before we can react. So it is as if ourselves, we don't believe in ourselves. We don't believe that we hold the keys to our own success, to our own salvation. We think that the West is always going to come to rescue us. We don't think on our own. We always wait for them. We always wait for them. And that is tied to white supremacy. Think about, for example, when you go to Senegal, when you see a white person, we already assume that whatever they do is best, whatever they say is best. In public spaces, when you go, you are with a white person, they serve them first before they serve you as the African. That is true. So dismantling white supremacy and whiteness itself needs to happen on the continent, the same way that it has to happen in America and in the diaspora. And that's what I was saying a couple of weeks ago, that even in Barack Obama's speech, talking about the murder of George Floyd, he did not talk about the necessity to dismantle whiteness. And until we do that, we're not going to see ourselves as people who have potential, who can do stuff on our own, because we always look to them for solutions.
Thank you so much, Maram. We're getting close to the end of this conversation, and there's a lot of comments that people are making, and that we need to look at. One of them is about the way we organize, and organize. People say organize at lower level. Today, what is clear is that there are many people who now are really engaged with people on a daily basis at what could be called the lower level. One of our conversation in the last time when we were doing the conversation about solidarity was young people in Kenya talking about how police brutality is happening there, and the killing of young people. It's basically extrajudicial killing, and having conversation with also young people who are marching and organizing in the US against the killing of young people. So those connections are really starting to happen. The people who are organizing are getting to meet in ways that I think was not easy or possible before. So yes, again, the language is also a question that people have been putting on and on. We are working, and really, yes, it's such a big struggle when we started the conversation and tried to do, not only do it in Swahili, now, planning conversation in Wolof, in Bambara, to really talk with, people who are not maybe always in the systems that we are talking about. But everybody has a place, has a role to play, whether it's someone who's growing food somewhere in a village, or if it's a teacher at a school, low-level school, or a teacher at the university. Everybody has a role to play, but we, as organizers, have to plan it out and make sure that everybody's role is outspelled, and people can figure out what to do in this situation.
Coumba, I agree very much with you. And back to the question you raised about what we need to do now. I think what we need is to find out how we can have that mass mobilization to shape the politics even within those colonial borders. So it is from there that we can now ensure that we force those who occupy our seats of government to push more towards Pan-African integration. But as long as we have leaders who are not ideologically grounded to understand that many of our countries will not work in the way that they are right now, uh, uh, as long as we continue to have leaders who cannot see that, who cannot recognize that, it will be very difficult, and we will need to ensure that political power is shifted and entrusted in the hands of people who can understand, who can see the vision, the future. I say we need visionary leadership. People can see into the future with precision. I read some time ago that as far back as the time of Ghanaian independence, Kwame Nkrumah ensured that there was a clause in the constitution to say that at the right time, the Ghanaian sovereignty will be handed over to that of a united Africa. And I think that we also need to ensure that we can have constitutional reviews at country level, that we have provisions like that, that will essentially, we have to ensure that we bring up leaders within these borders who will understand the imperative of pushing for Pan-African solidarity now. And it is when we are able to achieve that, in the process of that, a lot of conscientization will happen to our people, and they will be able to now pressure the political leaders to ensure that we have that united Africa, which is very, very paramount for us to achieve the liberation of the African people. And so for that to happen, what we need is that mass mobilization. And for those of us who are taking the front line, our job is to find out how to ensure that we make that happen. And I think that we need to break down the issues, the democratization agenda. How do we break it down too? We have electoral in Nigeria, for instance. I know we have issues around the ineptitude of our leaders, the inactiveness, the apathy of the citizens. We also have electoral issues. We are talking about electoral reform. We're talking about restructuring. So how do we organize the people so that they can achieve these things? But why helping them to do why trying to do these things with our people, ensuring that we push forward the message of the need for Pan-African solidarity and for the ultimate unity of all of the African peoples, not just within the continent, but starting from the continent, but also ensuring that we work with our sisters and brothers across the continent, reorienting our people. I think it is in the process of doing this that we'll achieve all of this.
Thank you, Gideon. Dr. Maram, last last words as we leave this conversation. What do you leave us with? Where do we go from here? Next Friday, we're having the same conversation, not the same theme, but still going and moving forward. We're talking about post-COVID and economic recovery of Africa. We want to make sure that the people that are appointed by the AU to figure out the recovery are not going to get us even more indebted in the future. And there is a whole group of feminists that came up with a feminist statement for post-recovery. We want to discuss that. But just to end the conversation of today before next Friday, again, racism today and ending racism, because that's really the big struggle that is going on globally and at different level, from whether it's police brutality, it's expressed under that form, whether it's in the content of the education system, whether it's just how it's built into the cities and so on. Ending racism is right now the big struggle that people are engaged in. But our question today was about the opportunity for furthering African liberation, because we also recognize that we are not yet free as Africans. So I just want to hear last comments from you, and thank again everybody who joined us before we leave. Dr. Mann.
On my end, I think it starts with believing in ourselves, having leaders who believe in Africa and Africa's potential, having leaders who don't see themselves as Westerners first, then African last, having a system of education that valorizes African cultural practices prior to the arrival of the Arabs and prior to the arrival of the Europeans, and looking at how our ancestors organized themselves so that we can be very proud of who we are and not go and look for ourselves in other people's cultures. I think that's a big start. That's something that we really need to work on. It's not, even in our educational systems, myself included, we are all educated in the West, and we look at Africa from those Western lenses, and we use practices and methodologies that might work in the West, but will not work in Africa. So to me, I think it starts with believing in ourselves, looking at ourselves as African first before we think of ourselves as Muslim, Christian, Nigerian, and all of those identities that was brought to us later. So at every level, we need to be proud of who we are, and then know that we have the answers in ourselves, and that we should not go and look for answers somewhere else or wait for other people to rescue us, because we can do it ourselves. We have the potential, we have the brain, and then we have the manpower to do it. Africa has the youngest population in the world, and there is no reason why our young people keep leaving and then the continent is left desolate. We have the means to really make this turnaround, but we have to work in solidarity and also know who we are and be proud of who we are. So that was my last word.
Thank you, Dr. Marame, for taking the time to join us. Everyone on the Zoom and people who are following us on Facebook Live, please keep the comments coming. The ideas, the connection needs to continue. Everyone who's organizing, again, this is really the moment for all of us to come together. Follow us on Twitter or Facebook. Join the movement, of course. Support the movement, because we do want the people of Africa to support this movement. We are asking you for at least $1 a month to make sure that this continue to happen. Thank you, Gideon, for also taking your time and joining us from Nigeria. And thank you for everything.
Thank you for inviting.
You're doing with the young people on campus, and for being so fearless. Thank you, Marame.
Thank you for hosting, Coumba.
Yeah, thank you to everybody. I don't want to start saying people's name. I see so many beautiful people who have joined us, taken their time. Stay with us. Let's keep it going. Everything that you are suggesting are pieces that we can continue working on, and there will be people who can join you. If you are interested in leading something, please come, let us know, and you know, we are there to support every movement that is working for African dignity on the continent and in the diaspora. Thank you very much. And thank you, Maurice.
Thank you for hosting, and thank you for inviting us. Thank you for the space too. Gideon, it was nice sharing it with you.
Bye-bye.
Marame, thank you. Amandla.
Bye.